Hello, everybody, and welcome. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. Wishing you all so well on this International Women's Day. We are so proud to have this incredible panel with us, and thank you all for joining us. I'm so excited to hear about your journeys and get into some questions. I think it would be great to start if we could just hear, just a little bit about it's a big question, but just a little bit about your career journey and sort of where you started thinking about our audience who are young people who are just stepping out and beginning their careers. Perhaps you could all look back a little bit and tell us about where you started, and then perhaps tell us just briefly about what your day looks like today in your career. Maybe you could start for us, Anne.
Thank you, Ray. Okay, so if you had told me when I was sitting in the seats of many of our participants that I would be running the Mayor's Office of Media and Entertainment, supporting one of the largest creative economies in the world, that's not where I plan to be, actually. When I started out, I majored in English and Mass Comm, mainly because I really liked doing those things, and did a series of internships in arts and entertainment, primarily in the indie space and nonprofit arts space. And it's a very long journey, but none of it was planned. I basically just saw opportunities and pursued them just out of interest, primarily wanting to work with people that I liked and wanting to learn a lot. And so I worked in public television, I worked in nonprofit arts management, and then after 15 years of working in public media, I went back and got a law degree at the age of 40. And then shortly after I graduated, one of my former colleagues was appointed commissioner, my current role, Cynthia Lopez, and she was looking for a general counsel. And so that's how I ended up where I am now. So it's a much longer story, but that's the short of it. And my day-to-day in this moment varies from minute to minute. We can get a little bit more into it, but what I would just say is that my office is charged with supporting all of the creative sectors, as well as the Office of Nightlife, our nighttime economy. Right now, we are primarily focused on bringing as much of that back as we can, so that we can bring us back to where we were, which was 150 billion in economic output and 500,000 jobs for New Yorkers.
Incredible. Thank you, Anne. And I think such a good and important reminder that, our careers in this industry are never a straight line. It's just about sort of pursuing what you're interested in, what you're curious about, and things start to fall into place. Would love to hear a little bit about your journey, Danielle.
Sure, thanks so much. So it's interesting because mine has been a little bit of a straight line, except for my first entrance into the media world. My first entrance came in through research, and I quickly learned that I was not meant for that. And that I really enjoyed being around people and the marketing side, the creative side, more than the statistical side. And so then I jumped into the business. And back then, cable was the growing entity for media. And so I found myself going to, some of these startup cable networks, which is crazy to think of them as startups, right, based on where we are today. And from there, I landed at ESPN probably about 15 years ago, and now Disney, which obviously owned ESPN, and it has been pretty great. I currently oversee media and entertainment and the restaurant category, where we verticalized. So I lean into our client direct relationships, and as you can imagine, just based on everything that's happening within COVID and all the changes in technology and the advancements, we are extremely focused in understanding our clients' businesses and industries. And so having a direct interest within each of those verticals to understand how we can better serve them and help their business grow across the Disney portfolio. So it's a little bit of what I do.
Amazing. Thank you, Danielle. And would love to hear from you, Rithia.
Hi, everyone. So Yeah, I think a little bit like Anne, my journey was not straight into media. I originally started working in the foundation sector. And I think probably one of the lessons here is that there are many different types of jobs within the media and entertainment industry, right? Not just front and behind the camera talent. So I actually started in philanthropy many, many years ago. I won't date myself. Yet. And so have subsequently mostly worked in corporate responsibility, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And that's how I ended up at Time Warner, actually. The role was to basically revamp their CSR strategy, manage their foundation, and lead their corporate DEI programs. I currently work at the Open Society Foundation, most notably known as George Soros's charity. And in my capacity, also lead culture and now do a little bit of strategy and operations, which I'm enjoying very much. And on my downtime, if you can believe I have any, I partner with my husband and a couple of other folks in the industry to produce our own original content, which we will soon be pitching to some of you in the room, but that's what I do in my spare time. I live in Brooklyn. I have a 9-year-old daughter who is very expressive.
Nice.
And
The hardest job of all of them.
Absolutely, yes. And most rewarding.
Yes. Wonderful. Well, thank you. And Saval.
Thanks. Hi, everyone. It's great to see everyone and to be able to spend some time with you this evening. I would say my career path was definitely not a linear one. After college and law school, I started off clerking for a judge for 2 years and learned that I really liked the courtroom and litigation, but couldn't find the exact job that I wanted right after my clerkship. So I decided to become a divorce lawyer for the rich and famous. And I did that in DC for 3 years. And then I had
the TV show. Good TV show fodder. Yeah.
Yeah. Then I had the opportunity to move to a large law firm where I was able to join their commercial litigation group. And I spent a lot of time trying all different types of cases, from fashion and to manufacturing cabinets, to Army battery equipment, to employment discrimination cases, to just general contractual disputes. So spent many years doing that. And then finally had the opportunity, someone from my law firm came to me and said, you know, Discovery's looking for a global head of litigation and IP. Do you know anyone? So I kept spitting out names of people who might be interested. And like the 5th or 6th time this person asked me for names, I said, do you think this might be something I would be interested in? I've always had a love of media and television. So for me to be able to marry both litigation and media together was really an interesting opportunity and a dream come true. And since I've now been at Discovery for almost 10 years, I now sit in the general counsel role, which is, you know, very rewarding, fascinating, interesting, never dull. And I feel like it's a real privilege to get to work with the creative side of the business, but also to help the business side of the business with the CFO and others. And so I can't say enough about just being open, getting the best experience you can get at the time that you can get it, and looking out for opportunities, nurturing your relationships with people, and eventually you'll find, you know, the perfect job for you.
I love that. Thank you so much. Thank you everybody for sharing a little bit of your background. I just to build on, you know, what you were saying, Saval, you know, one of the things that I often say when I have this conversation with young people is that every experience is valuable, and there's really like no job that's too small or not right, because it's such an exciting time early on in your career to really have that period of discovery to figure out, okay, well, what am I good at? What am I not good at? What do I really enjoy? Because sometimes it's really hard to know what it means to be a producer or work in legal or work in development until you really get a chance to try it. So I definitely encourage young people to get in there and to just, you know, do jobs and get as much exposure as you can, because that also helps you to build skills and to really maximize what you can do as you grow. And, I'm curious, we are on International Women's Day, so we're talking about female leadership and what that looks like. And obviously that's a really interesting and important conversation at all times, but it feels particularly poignant now that we, have the wonderful Kamala Harris as a vice president. It's come into view in a really interesting way. And I'm curious if any of you would be open to sharing experiences that you felt as a female leader, you had to sort of step up or shift or pivot the way you did something, and how that has strengthened who you are in your career. Could be a challenge that you faced, or it could be something that you felt, doubtful of, but how you sort of overcame that and what that means to you today.
I could jump in quick and just talk a little bit about, I landed at ESPN, and I was a fan of sports. I played sports growing up, but here I was surrounded by extreme fandom and understanding of sports, and surrounded by a lot of men, right? And I definitely always felt like, do I know enough? Am I going to know every answer that someone's going to ask me when I'm in the room? How am I going to overcome this? And what I started to realize was I was focusing on the wrong thing. I was focusing on what I didn't know, and what I did was I leaned into what I knew. I was great at understanding how to know what a client needed and how we could work across what I had to help them deliver on what their goals might have been for the year. I knew how to translate what they were trying to do across what we had at ESPN, regardless if I knew every team and every player and could hang in that conversation about sports. And, I ended up leading probably one of our largest sports agencies relationship. And, I was a female doing that amongst a lot of men. And so it just goes to show, business is business. And if you find what you're really good at and lean into it and focus on that versus what you might not know. And then, of course, I was always prepared. There's always an easy way to overcome things. Just be prepared, and I think I'm really happy I pushed myself and stayed as long as I did and worked through that and accomplished it. So I would say, for me, it was about being female in sports.
Amazing. Thank you for sharing that, Danielle. I love that idea of focus on what you do know instead of what you don't know, because you're always going to be in rooms and not know things. I say this too. I'm like, you're never going to know everything. You're never going to be the quote unquote best, whatever that means, but we all have something incredible to offer. So leaning into that, I think that's great advice. Anyone else?
I'll jump in. I think that one of the things, just because we're all sort of International Women's Day and this is an all women's panel, I think one of the biggest challenges for women, and there have been some studies on this as well, is the fact that, sometimes leadership opportunities come with a lot of quote unquote downside, right? They come as a result of challenges, as a result of sort of difficulty, right? And it's sometimes difficult to really have the strength or the courage to jump into those situations to kind of prove your mettle, right? And to prove that you can do it. And so I think, that's my personal experience. And the way in which I really achieved more responsibility and leadership at Warner Media really was as a result of, this, a kind of historical acquisition and the coming together of two companies with two very different cultures, and, sort of the way that Lord Baelish used to say a lot in Game of Thrones, right? Chaos breeds opportunity, right? Chaos is a ladder. And so sometimes I think something that would be good as sort of a lot of the young women on this panel think about their careers is that, we have to try and develop some level of comfort with risk, right? Some level of comfort with uncertainty, because that is part of the journey. That is part of the journey of being employed and being a leader in any industry, but also in media and entertainment, especially given how much change is traversing that industry currently. So I would say that, trying to develop some level of comfort for uncertainty and to try and find your leadership center through chaos is something that it's really important in order for you to develop and be successful in this business.
It's interesting. I remember when I was just starting out, actually just graduated college, and I really had no clue where I wanted to go, because it can be really overwhelming. You're on a track from all through school, like your schedule's defined, your goals are defined, your classes are pretty much defined. And when you graduate, like the world is kind of your oyster in a funny way. Like what direction you want to go, and sort of like being okay with just sort of trusting that, okay, I'm going to try this and we'll see where this goes, but not worrying that I was like locking myself into something for the, indefinite future was one. And then I took a gap year and I was working at a bed and breakfast in England. And my boss was, she was very experienced in the hospitality industry, which I was not. And she called me out on something that I did that was wrong. And I tried to like cover myself. And she looked at me square in the eye and was like, you don't always have to have the right answer. And that really bothered me, right? Because I was like, I'm not like, how dare you accuse me of such a thing? But it's advice that has stayed with me for a long time now, because I think in our effort to want to advance, to look like a leader, particularly when you're younger, right? There's this tendency to want to present and to like feel like you have the right answer, instead of sort of listening and just owning, yeah, I don't know why I did that, and how can I do it better, is something that I think is important to point out, and that has served me well as I move into the different roles that I have. Moving into city government, I was quite nervous about taking such a public role. I'm really not a public person. I'm very much an introvert. And I remember talking to some close colleagues and saying, I'm just not sure. Like, I look at the people in government, they've been handpicked. Like, I just grew into the role. And a very good friend said to me, it doesn't have to look like everybody else's. Like, you can make it your own. And so that was really helpful as well.
I love that. That is absolutely wonderful advice, especially in a world where there's so much pressure to be perfect or to be the one who sort of knows everything. That's actually not always what serves you well. I think what's great is to know what you know well and to lead into that, and the things that you're not sure about, to have graciousness in being corrected, and also having graciousness in correcting others when there's an appropriate time for that. All of those skills are so important. Anything you wanted to add to that, Paul?
No, I think everyone said it perfectly, but it made me think of the three things that my dad used to talk to me about. He's about being successful. He said, you really only need to do three things: show up, be on time, and come prepared. He said most people don't even show up. They're half in,
It's true.
half out. And their timing is off, or they're not on time, and then they're not prepared. And I think, like Danielle said earlier, it's really important to be prepared. The other thing I would add to what Anne said is it's also important to be accountable. In a sense, it's important to be accountable for the mistakes that you've made. I know in my career I've made mistakes. I have a terrific team, but on occasion they make mistakes too. But what really impresses me as a leader is when someone admits their mistake and owns up to it. And then the focus is really on the solution, not the problem. And I think that's a really important quality to remember as you're starting out in your career, about being accountable for your mistakes. And then the other thing I would touch upon, Ray, that you mentioned, is just being authentic. It's important to show up in anything that you do with who you are, not who you think you're supposed to be necessarily. It's good to get advice. It's good to model behaviors from others, as long as you can do it in a way that's authentic to you. I think it's really painful to see, especially women sometimes, to feel as though they have to be someone else in how they're presenting themselves. And that's really exhausting and hard to do successfully long term. So I would encourage everyone to be themselves.
I love that. And thank you everyone for such insightful such insightful anecdotes and sharing wisdom from all generations, also from the dads. I love that. I think, and to share from my own experience and very briefly to introduce myself, I know I realize I didn't say too much about who I am, but, I also grew up in production. I worked at Viacom for 12 years and eventually started Culture.House about 5 years ago. And, always knew I wanted to start my own business, and kind of going through the Viacom and freelance world for many years, I was really particular about exposing myself to all different kinds of productions. I always knew I wanted to start my own business. And, eventually when the time was right, where I had the relationships and the finances and all the things to do it, I wanted to be, selling my own TV shows and making things happen. And as we know, that's a really, it's a tough mountain to climb. And I'm really proud of the fact that, we now have a show at Disney Plus, we have one at Netflix, Hulu, OWN. And even now, having gone through all of the training and learning and making lots of mistakes, literally last week, I made a giant mistake on a budget with Disney Plus, actually. And it was really bad. Like, it was bad to the point where people were like, how did you miss this, Ray? Like, this is, and so I was super embarrassed, just so everybody knows. And I had to make a decision. Is like, in my head, I knew what I was going to do, but what went through my head was, should I try to sort of kind of blame it on someone else and make it seem like, if I'm being honest, right? You go through all the emotions. You're like, if I blame it on them, they might not ever find out, but maybe I should. And then ultimately, of course, you're like, no, you can't do that. Own up, accountable, like, listen, my bad, big one, but mine. And I'm telling you, it's so true what everyone is saying, that it really matters to be accountable, and especially when you're in a leadership position, right? That is a big piece of being a leader. People that work with you and work on your team are also going to make mistakes. And you know what? You have to own those mistakes often too, not just the ones that you personally make. Because part of being a leader, and frankly, a gracious colleague as you grow, I think as young people, as you're starting in your careers, you want to always, I think, be a gracious colleague, be someone that people feel like, this person is going to have my back, whether I'm in the room or not. And that's about just having an ethical standard of how you behave as someone in this business. Because I think someone said this earlier, is that part of the job now is nurturing your relationships. And nurturing relationships is about building trust and being someone who is ethical and of a certain standard. Because I think there's a lot of sort of rampant abuse, emotional abuse, kind of manipulation in this business. And I think it's our responsibility, and I hope the responsibility of this generation that's coming up of diverse young people, to say, like, we're not going to continue to do it this way, and to have the sort of decisiveness to have that different kind of behavior. And I know I just went on a tangent, but that's what happens. So I think wonderful to hear what everyone is saying in this regard. And I think what would also be great to hear is that for young people who are on the call or just starting their careers, is there something very specific that any of you did early on in your career that really kind of paid off for you? Was it taking a certain kind of role or responsibility, or, learning a particular kind of skill, something that, really over time has done well for you?
I'll jump in. I'll just say, I think the biggest thing was appreciating that I could outwork almost anyone, right? I may not be the smartest person in the room or the most talented, but I certainly could be the most hardworking. So I got really familiar with hard work very early on. And I think having that mindset served me well, is also being flexible and open. So not getting thrown off if someone asked me to do something different, being open to doing things that weren't my job, just for the sake of learning and growing, and like Ray said, helping out a colleague. I think those are the things that really helped me early on.
Great.
Yeah, I agree with Seville. I mean, I think probably the thing that propelled my career to another level really was taking on the job that nobody could figure out, right? Which involved a little bit of risk, but I do think that it put me on another level, because beyond the hard work and dedication, I was also able to prove that I had vision, and that just places you in a different sort of category of estimation among your colleagues, right? but sort of stepping up and doing the thing that no one else envisions or can, or is quite, or wants to tackle, right? And sometimes those are not the sexiest jobs, but they are the jobs that are critical or important to the business.
Absolutely.
I would add to that too, learning what everybody else does, right? Or at least understanding what everybody else does so that I could see what my work meant in relation to what everyone else was doing. So that I could see like how what I did affected them and how what they did affected me. So that if you're trying to move a project forward, you know, okay, I can't do my work in this way because it's going to mess with the time frame or the process that the colleagues that I'm working with have to execute in order to move this forward. And so, you know, one of the first things I've done at every job that I've had was really get to know what everybody does, just so that I could understand what the culture was, what the process was, and how people interrelated. And that has worked pretty well so far.
I would also say a lot of what Anne is saying resonates with me for sure. And in addition, I would just say, you know, I made a point to set a goal that was at least 5 years, if not further away, or a role that I thought I would want. It might have changed, which is absolutely fine, but making sure you're not just thinking of the very next role. Right? Like if you could do anything for yourself, like put it out there, put it in the universe, make it happen, say it out loud, tell someone, you know, and set that further out, because it's an even greater accomplishment when you get there. And it might look a little different, but you'll know when you got there. And then from there, you set the next 5 years. And I feel like that has really helped me. And it was something early on I just did. I would also just add, you know, for everybody, as you think about where your career goes, and everybody talked about how it had twists and turns, and, you know, and mine might have been a little bit more straightforward, but there's no final decisions in your career. Like there's no finals. That next decision will be great and it'll lead you to something else. And so there's no finality to anything when it comes to your career. It is absolutely a journey, and feel confident and take that risk and take that challenge. Yeah. So I would just say, just set those goals, set them further out, be
I love that.
presumptuous, do it.
I think that's great. Man, I'm loving all this advice. Thanks. No, it's absolutely true. And I think one of the things that I also like to add for young people, especially in a conversation where, you know, we say, take on as many roles and set goals and do things, the idea that there will be times, and there may be times, where you'll find yourself in a situation like I did, where I really felt like I was discriminated against, is probably a strong word, but I felt like the treatment that I was getting, or the ability to advance, or the lack of ability to advance, I should say, had to do with, you know, it was certainly gendered, it was definitely ageist. And there were a few really particular situations where I felt like, oh, am I being too sensitive? Or is this actually something that is happening to me that feels wrong? And, you know, I spoke to a lot of my colleagues and I tried to figure it out. And a certain like mid-level in my career, I went through this. And I only say that as young people, because when you're in those situations, to really trust your instinct. So if something was like on your 5-year plan, but it's not feeling good, and you're not being treated in a way that feels right, and you feel like maybe I'm being too sensitive, you're probably not. And it's okay to just get right out of that situation, move out. Nothing is worth compromising your sense of confidence and mental health. And no career track that you've set for yourself is worth that. And that's something that I have had to remind myself throughout my career. And I remind people now, because I think that in our industry, sometimes there can be this thing where you got to pay your dues, and paying your dues and working hard, yes. But going through a situation where you feel like, you know, something doesn't feel right, don't let the plan that you had override how you're feeling. That's my 2 cents on that. And I'm sure if others have to add to that, but I also wanted to ask, as young people now are starting to interview and maybe look for jobs, all of you are in positions where I'm sure you're hiring folks or looking for people. What are some of the things that you look for, the qualities that you look for when you meet someone to say, okay, this person is someone that I might want to work with? What are you looking for in an interview or even an email to give some practical, tactical advice?
An email, professional, for sure. I don't know you necessarily, and we're not, especially if you're starting out, like it should be really formal. And there was a point in my, like when I was getting direct emails from interns or whatever, that I would notice sometimes the tone would be really informal. And so that already signals to me, if I'm going to put you in a position where I need you to deal with my colleagues, like I need to know that you have a certain degree of respect for the position. And then in the course of an interview, I look to see how much the person's asking about, like what kind of questions they're asking. Sometimes people want to know right away, like, where's this position going to lead to me? And I'm like, you don't even have the position yet, right?
Right.
So what am I going to learn? What is the office environment? What are you looking for? What does the job entail? And I have to say, I do tend to have a bias towards people who have work experience, not necessarily relevant work experience, but if you've worked as a waitress or a waiter or like in a customer service type setting, and you've done it for a while successfully, like that tells me a lot about the kind of person that you are. You're going to be able to think on your feet and deal with some very difficult people on the fly.
I think those are all great. And let me see, I think I'm usually very open to people reaching out on LinkedIn, and I don't mind that kind of thing. I do also, sort of to pick up on one of your points, Anne, want to sort of have an expectation of what kind of a conversation the person reaching out wants to have, right? So it'd be interesting not just to get an email because you're looking for a job, but what else about the industry or the work or about your career would be useful, right? Because there aren't always positions necessarily available, but it's important to start developing a relationship, which I think is the second piece, is to just take the time to actually get to know people, right? A lot of times I hear sort of young folks or people who are looking for jobs talking about networking, and it's just a very sort of kind of transactional relationship that they develop with folks. And I think it's more important to actually try and develop a deeper sense of connection with the person that you're trying to reach out to. So rather than sort of blanketly reaching out to everyone on this panel, who's the person that you connect with, that you think that you could learn something from, and you could develop a little bit of a relationship over time, and that person could be helpful and even kind of mentor you, right? So it should be more than a transactional connection. I think is what I would say is one of the things that I'm looking for, at least in people. And then, I also like folks that are just, and I look for people who are not shy about kind of pursuing their dream, right? And it doesn't mean that I have to make it come true for you or anybody on this panel, but I'd love to get an idea of that sort of sense of commitment and drive and passion, and that you're bringing that to sort of everything that you do, right? Not just the thing that you may be particularly interested in doing today. So those are some of the things that I look for.
I can just add a little bit off of what you were saying. I think the follow through is super important, right? Because there is a fine balance to your point of over communication or just reaching out to reach out. So I think the follow through is really important, both the cadence and what you're following through with. Right? Like, why are you reaching out? Make it relevant, make it meaningful, and it will spark a connection that you can grow from there. So I would just say the timing and the follow through is super important.
Yeah, I think that's great. It's all great advice, and I think really helpful. And I'll just add that I agree wholeheartedly with everything. It's interesting. One of the young people who was at a Center for Communications event actually had reached out to me, and we exchanged emails for a while, and she's now working with us full time. And one of the things that I told her was that your email style and your persistence and the sort of professionalism of your email interaction gave me a lot of confidence, because part of this job is going to you being helping me to set my schedule and make all the things, and that's really important to have the right kind of professionalism whenever anyone is interacting on your behalf. You're going to be really careful about that, but also anyone who's interacting on behalf of your team or the work that you're doing. So your first email out to anybody is such an important impression of who you are. And follow up, absolutely. After, if someone spends the time to meet with you for 15 minutes or half an hour or whatever it might be, a really strong follow-up that shows that you appreciate the time that they've taken, and what you took from that, I think, is also so important to setting a great impression. So wishing all of you luck as you get out there on LinkedIn and do outreach. It's always an opportunity to show people who you are and what you can do. Wonderful. Great. And is there any other advice, before we move into questions, that you all would just sort of, that has been important to you? I know we've been talking about it throughout, but if there's anything specific or something specifically anecdotal that's come up recently that you feel like is interesting to share and could be valuable, would love to hear that.
I just wanted to lift up something that you said, Rishama, before we moved into this section, which was about just and I think Seville also touched on it, sort of this idea of authenticity, and also in showing up. And also, if you're in a situation where you're feeling uncomfortable, to not feel as though you have to put up with that in order to get your career goals ahead. And I do think it's a really important thing to emphasize, particularly as we've been through, the summer of 2020 and the Black Lives Matter demonstrations, but also the Me Too movement in the previous years, right? That it is really important to be able to fulfill yourself professionally in a way that is authentic and safe, and that nurtures your development. So I wanted to say that again, because I do think we've come a long way, but we're not quite all the way there yet. And those situations, as you can see from many articles and continued sort of news, do happen. And it's important to acknowledge, particularly for young women, because it does happen. And I just wanted to lift that back up and say that it is something that we as women still have to deal with. We've not reached that medal of full equality that we are searching for, and it is important to keep in mind that it is something that you will be dealing with on a daily basis and trying to balance as you come into this industry or any other.
Absolutely. Thank you, Earthia, for putting a fine point on that, for sure. Anyone else? Well, I'll give us, I know we have to get to questions, but I'll give us a very small example of something that happened to me that I was actually thinking about recently. And I think also for me, and I don't think this is certainly the case, but I think when I was younger, what I let more things slide because of exactly what everyone on this call is saying. I sort of felt like, oh, I don't want to be a pain in the butt. Or maybe this is not a big deal. I'll just kind of deal with it. And when I look at some of those situations now, I'm like, what on earth were you thinking? Like, how would you ever? I was at an event, this is when I worked at Viacom, and a male colleague who was much more senior to me, and he was I can't remember exactly the title, it was like head of ad sales or something like that. And we were having an interaction, and it sounds crazy even just saying this now, but he like grabbed my hand and kissed it, and then sort of, so it's not, super weird, because you could say, oh, but it is super weird. Let's be real about it. But he kind of grabbed my hand, kissed it, and said, oh yeah, I would love to, get some ideas. Just that whole thing of like, I'd love to hear more of your ideas. We should talk over a drink or grab dinner. Like, very sort of, I'm sure I'm getting some nods from my fellow panelists.
It would only not be weird if he kissed every other male's hand
Correct.
who was also on the team. That's the only way that would not be weird.
And so if someone was to say that to me now, I would be like, that interaction is completely inappropriate. At the time, I remember laughing it off, being uncomfortable, but telling the colleague like, oh, it's, I can deal with it. I can deal with it because it's supposed to be my problem that I should have to deal with it. But as we know, and as we should know, it's not, and it shouldn't be. So, you know, we've all been in those situations to some degree. I mean, now I'm married, I have children, so I think I don't give off any of those vibes anymore. But I think it's like people mean, but that's the wrong, I don't mean it like that, because nobody is giving off those vibes. I just mean that it's sort of like what I thought was okay when I was younger for me, I know now would not be okay with me. And so for everybody, their journey is different. But I think, again, just coming back to this idea of like trusting your gut, and it's never something you should have to deal with. It's never something that you've done or any kind of sentiment that you've given people an invitation, never, ever, ever. So just to remind
it's also, it's not as though he gave you a script and you knew what was going to happen. This is the thing that's difficult about these situations, is that you all of a sudden find yourself in them. It's happened to me too. And all of a sudden, like some person is like hugging me from behind, and I'm like, what just happened? But I don't have eyes in the back of my head, so I can't, you know, predict that situation is unfolding, right? So part of it is just the awareness that it can happen in a moment where you can't like predict that it's happening, and then all of a sudden you're in the middle of it, and then you have to like manage the situation, right? And I think that's another aspect of it, that just, you know, to be real with everybody who is on this call, that is something that we have to manage as professionals, right?
Yes, absolutely.
One of the things that reminds me of is, I think especially at this juncture that most of the people on listening in are at, it's at a time when everyone's sort of like going their own way. And so the connections that we had in, say, college or whatever, like they change, and all of a sudden we're thrown into a new work environment and we don't know who anyone is, and maybe we've lost touch with our friends, right? And so I think what's also really important is to emphasize you have to find your group. Like you cannot, it's so hard to embark on this stage of your career alone. Like they don't have to work in the same field, but like you need to find a crew that's really supportive too, hopefully not competitive with you in an unhealthy way, but people that really kind of get you, and like just trying to connect with those folks. I think too often we're telling people to like look for an older mentor or look for a, you know, a distant mentor, but sometimes the best mentors, and I have experienced this myself, have been just friends of mine who are learning as well, and we're sharing experiences, and we're like, yeah, that doesn't make sense, and like this is how I handled it, or this is what my mentor at work told me, and so just recognizing that it doesn't have to be somebody older than you or more experienced than you, that sometimes it can actually just be the person sitting next to you or on the Zoom with you here. And so just to keep an open mind about the types of people to connect with, it doesn't always have to be that person with all of the titles on LinkedIn.
Thank you for that, Anne. I agree. I think if you're lucky to find a tribe to kind of go through together, that can often be the best sounding board. And it's wonderful to have that. Great. Well, I think we're good to kind of move to questions. So I'd like to invite Lauren Lee to ask her question.
Hi, my name's Lauren. Thank you guys for being here today. I am a film and TV student, and I was curious about how you've been able to form and foster a supportive community amongst the other women that you work with, especially now that everything's virtual. I just feel like we work with a lot of really cool people, but we might not be able to connect with them, especially other like women that are like us. And so I was just wondering how you've been able to kind of like keep that community alive and fresh and supportive.
I mean, I have a WhatsApp group. I have, just regular iMessage group. Also have with like my sort of Shiro's crew. That's what we call each other, Shiro's crew. We have regularly scheduled quarterly, cocktails, and whoever can show up, shows up, but just try and establish some kind of rhythm. And sometimes, my WhatsApp group chat, it's like really silly stuff. Like, did you see what Michelle wore to the inauguration? And wasn't it so great? Right. But it's just like that whole connection, right? That is constant. I would say, don't overthink it. Just create a platform that's easy for everybody to communicate on, and do it often about things that matter and are deep, and about things that are silly and just fun, and enjoy it.
That's great. Thank you. Wonderful. And, very briefly from my end, it's been certainly, I think it's a great question, Lauren. And even with our own team, we've tried to figure out ways to stay connected. And so I personally try to be really mindful about once in a while, just having a list of people and just sending like a very quick check-in email and say, no need to respond, but just checking in, hope you're doing well. And just, even if it's just really small interactions and not putting pressure on people to have these big, long interactions or getting on a Zoom. And so just, making the effort, building it into your day or into your week to just do kind of some check-ins with people, I think is just a good way to stay on each other's minds and know that you're there to support each other.
And I would just say the Zoom fatigue is definitely real at this moment. So don't be afraid of just calling someone and not having to see them. That's okay too.
Yeah.
Right? Because it is definitely real. So we all feel that, but.
Absolutely. Wonderful. Thank you.
Hi there. Thank you guys so much for being here today. I really appreciate it. Happy International Women's Day to each of you. My name is Hannah Groman, and I'm a student at Drake University, which is in Des Moines, Iowa. So I'm a little far off from everybody else. I'm a double major in public relations and digital media production with a minor in leadership. And my question for you guys today is, what skills have been the most beneficial for you in your career thus far, technical or otherwise?
I'll start. One would be the ability to listen to others. I think it's very important in most settings to listen to what other people have to say before you just start shouting out and talking. It helps you to understand someone else's perspective, where they're coming from, and it also helps you to think through how you want to respond. So I think listening is a very important quality. I think it's important quality to treat everyone with respect. That I'm a big fan of that, treating everyone the same from the mailroom up to the C-suite. Some of the most important relationships that I made early on in my career was with people in the mailroom, because as a litigator, I had to get things out. This was before electronic filing with courts. And a lot of times we had to send things out either through a courier or through FedEx. And if you have a relationship with those people, they can help you be successful. And it really takes a village, I feel like, to be successful. And those types of relationships can make or break you. There's that person who would flag down the FedEx truck for you, but if they don't know you, they don't have a relationship with you, the FedEx truck might roll on by and you might miss your deadline. And then again, we've talked a lot about this. I think it is really important to be yourself. And I think it's also important to take advantage of the warmth and the friendships that you have now. You'd be surprised at the people sitting next to you, what their dreams are and what they may become. And it's really nice to have had authentic relationships early on as a student and in your career, and to see your friends go in different directions and to be there for one another in the future. So that would be my advice.
Wonderful.
Oh, sorry.
No, please.
I would say, I don't know if this is a skill, but just remembering that we don't do anything alone, that every achievement, every task that we've done, typically, I mean, there's very few, but every achievement that I've ever accomplished has been with the help of other people, and just remembering that and recognizing that, and remembering to recognize that however small. It's sort of building on what Saval said. It's really just about building good relationships and recognizing our interconnectedness with our peers and others that are working with us.
Absolutely.
Can I chime in? I want to triple echo all of that. But I'm always a fan of just naming a couple of hard skills, because I do think they are important in success. And so I do want to say, just basic budgeting, know how to read a budget. It's super important. At no point in your career is that not going to be an important aspect to know. And the second hard skill I would say is, and Seville will probably agree with me on here, is learn how to read a contract. Somebody someday is going to give you a contract. And I've been in situations where I've had friends and colleagues of every persuasion who just can't even get past the first page, right? And there are so many things that are important for your success contained in a contract. And I wholly believe you're going to be, a super successful person. It's so important to be able to do those two things, to read a budget, to understand what's enclosed in those numbers, and to read a contract and understand how it impacts your career, your content, especially when it has to do with IP. Learn to do that for everyone on this call.
Mhm. Hard skills also, issue spot. Learn how to identify issues and distill them, like really learn how to summarize, especially like, and I feel it more now in the, I'm gonna sound really old, in the digital age when we're getting like hundreds of emails a day, right? Like I don't have time to read like a page long email. Like I just need to know the facts and what it is we need to get there. And so that skill to be able to distill and summarize information is like super critical. In addition to what you need, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah, agree, Anne, completely.
Oh, Sabali, I think you're muted in case you're saying.
I would just say, to follow up on what Anne said, the ability to write clearly, and not just to be concise, but to be clear in your messaging.
Yes.
Is so important.
Yeah. Thank you for that, Hannah. You set off a really good question, and I'll very briefly add to that. For folks who are on the call who are interested in being producers and creators themselves, I know we've got a range of people. I shot and edited my own work, coming up, and was able to, I shot and edited short pieces and long pieces all over the world for about 10 years. And that gave me so much experience to be able to have the freedom to know that I could physically go out and produce the content end to end for someone. I am not a great cinematographer. I am not a great editor today, but for the time that I was doing it and for the type of work that I was doing, it allowed me financially to have a lot of freedom and to work in a lot of, one-person band situations. But it also gave me so much experience as a producer now because I have a deep innate understanding of what all of those processes actually look like. So it helps me to be a better producer. I have a better understanding of the budget, for me. So for me, that was extremely helpful, and it allowed me to learn all aspects of the business. So if that's of interest, I think it's certainly worth learning how to shoot and editing. Premiere is Premiere and Avid are your sort of your two go-tos. And then to add to what Yurthia was saying, in budgeting, if you can, learn movie magic. It is absolutely critical once you start getting into bigger projects. And if you are leading in that way, it's never something that won't be helpful.
Hi, ladies. Thank you so much for spending your evening sharing some advice and just being here, sharing experiences as well. My name is Madison, and I am currently a senior at the College of William and Mary, studying communication and management. And my question for you all is, I've played the sport of golf my whole life, and even in college, and I'm looking to maybe have this transition into something that I do more permanently as a career. And this sport is notorious for being dominated by males. And I'm aware that this might be the same demographic as I go into this position later on. And so I just wanted some advice with, how can I eliminate that fear that I might experience or run into when it comes to speaking up or speaking my mind. I feel at times that I kind of keep opinions or ideas to myself out of fear that they might be rejected because they might be in the minority. So I just kind of want some advice on just kind of pursuing a male dominated career path, and just kind of some ideas as to how I can rid of those internal fears that I might be dealing with.
I can just touch on some of the internal fears. I can pretty much guarantee you that if you are going to ask a question or someone else in the room does not know the answer and they are happy you asked that question. Thank goodness Madison answered it, because I had that same question. And it's amazing when you step outside of your comfort zone in a situation like that, how much you're teaching everybody else around you and the dialogue you'll start, right? And so I would just say, just always tell yourself, I am not the only person that does not know this in this room. And it will be freeing, and you'll start to experience that as it goes on, but be confident in that. And I would just say, look for someone that you can bring along or that can bring you along as well. I think we all touched on having that tribe or that support. And I think that's just extremely important if you're walking into a situation that you might not feel comfortable in, right? That is where you have to lean into that tribe.
Anyone else? Yeah, well, first of all, I love that, Danielle, that you're usually not the only one who has that question. That's so true. And that's super helpful to know as we all go through situations where maybe we're unsure of something. So hopefully that's helpful to you too, Madison.
Can I recommend something else to Madison?
Oh yeah, please.
Madison, there's a great book by Reshma Saujani. You know, she's the founder of Girls Who Code. It's called Brave, Not Perfect. If you can get a copy of it and afford to get one, I know paying for school is expensive. But she basically talks about this idea that for women, it's very difficult to be brave because of all of the failure that we've been socialized into internalizing, right? And that really the skill that is like so important in the professional sector is to have an ability to just have a little bit of courage, like in that room, to answer the question. It might be an interesting read and might help you kind of develop some perspective, and also to know that you're not the only woman who feels that way, right? That there are many, many of us, no matter how much we've achieved. So I recommend it. It's an easy read.
Hi, thank you ladies so much for being here today. My name is Benny Mustika and I'm a recent graduate from Fashion Institute of Technology with bachelor degree in advertising. My question is, what motivates all of you to keep going?
I just feel like there's still so much to learn. Every day I'm learning something new, whether it's just from a task put in front of me or from a conversation that I have with a colleague. It can be very stressful, as you can imagine, especially right now, trying to figure out a way forward and to lead a team that is working remotely and we're not together. But I think one, knowing that other people are counting on me to show up at work every day, or counting on me to get up in the morning and feed my son breakfast, or help my mom figure something out. But really, at the end of the day, it's just I welcome the challenge that the day brings. It's not always fun. It's definitely not always fun, but I really do appreciate the learning experience and the ability to use my skills and test my skills.
I'm excited for all of you, the momentum that is starting to happen, right? We all just talked about how that probably wasn't necessarily there for us, right? And different experiences. And so I'm excited to see that. I'm excited to see how we're elevating and we're seeing more women in the C-suite, right? At financial institutions, we talked about financial literacy is so important, right? And to understand some of these things. And so it's happening. It's going to happen more, and you get to carry on that momentum. So I'm super excited by that. And also giving back, right? And getting to meet women who are just entering into the business and who are excited about what their future holds, and that gives me motivation to keep going, for sure. So impressive.
Thank you. And I think I'm sorry, someone else. I think that's so true about everyone who's asked a question so far. And I think for me, and what I think is helpful as you're going through your career is really finding, to your point, Benning, is what is the thing that really makes you feel fulfilled. For me, I've always been a really political person. And what I mean by that is, throughout my life, I've thought about my experiences and culture and what's happening in the media with a social political lens. It's meaningful to me when we talk about things like representation matters or talking about, diverse casting. All of these things, I see them as really important sort of culture changing moments. And I personally believe that pop culture and media is a really important factor in giving people a cultural script in how they see themselves and how they see one another. So for me, I worked really hard to build a career that allowed me to work towards that goal. And I sort of identified that earlier on in my career, and everything that I did didn't always necessarily fall directly into that bucket, but it was somehow getting me closer. Maybe it was a piece of work that felt like it was, making culture change. Maybe it was something that was financially lucrative, that was going to help me to be able to pay for something that was more of a passion project. And, finally reaching a point where, starting a company and a business where we're making, I hope, the kinds of TV shows and content and work that will lead to that culture change. And so every day I'm motivated because of things like we're working right now with a big network and going through a conversation around the traditional production budgets, and me saying, well, I think a traditional production budget needs to include a much more comprehensive mental health package for everybody that's involved in the show. This is a really sensitive topic, and the filmmakers that are working on this day to day, they need support, not just during the process, but afterwards. So I don't think this should be extra. I think this should be part of what it is. So, I'm really motivated by finding any way for me that I can help to make that change and how our industry does what we do. And I think if you can find that for yourself and then figure out how everything you're doing ladders up into that, then every day feels like a new sort of way to get out there and keep reaching some kind of goal, which is exciting.
Hi, everyone. Again, thank you all so much for being here and giving us all of this great advice and sharing your experiences. As one of our fellow participants said already, my name is Carolina Lopez Rivera. I am a senior at SDSU, San Diego State University, double majoring in communication and Spanish. And my question for you all is, in your experience, when it comes to gender equality in the media industry, what do you think is the most assertive way to fight for it or to make a difference?
I guess I'm going to start by talking about making a small difference. So the lowercase d. I think it's really important in whatever role you have within the media to not only to be able to share yourself and contribute, but to lift others up around you. And if you're in the position to provide opportunities for other young women, to be able to do that, if you're in a position to lift up your women colleagues and peers to do that, I think those little day-to-day gestures and seizing a moment and an opportunity when you can is really, really important. And you'd be surprised, like, the type of ripple effects that those actions might take.
Be excellent at what you do, but excellent in a way that's real and achievable, not in a way that you're sort of emulating some kind of perfection that isn't really attainable. But be excellent at your job. It's sort of the rules that Deville shared earlier about showing up and being prepared, and just, generally be excellent, and be excellent in the way in which you treat other people, in the way in which you relate to other folks, in your commitment to the work, and also be excellent to yourself.
I would add, like, along those lines, like being true to yourself, right? Because you're there to represent. I mean, that's how we get diversity, inclusion, equity, is by being our true selves in the space that we're in. And lifting up, as Saval and everyone else has said, that, like, lifting up other people around us when we have the opportunity. But just asserting yourself in that space in a way that feels true.
Yes, absolutely. And I'm sorry, we have a guest, a new panelist here, but being really mindful of the fact that you'll be in situations perhaps where you'll feel like you're being pitted against other women in your group, or that you're working around. And it's typically not the women themselves that are doing that, but it's like the strategic forces around us that make us feel that way. And to sort of do something radical and not fall into that, and just really try to reach out. And oftentimes I've found when I work with women who have like a tougher exterior, who are maybe harder for me to break through with, it's usually a result of it's usually a consequence of the experiences that they've had, which often are really challenging. So, giving one another the benefit of the doubt and trying to work well with women and not, and working against the competitive forces that the world wants us to buy into is the best thing that we can all do for each other.
Hi, this has been really inspiring. Thank you. My name is Eleanor Trotman. I run a project called My Local Heroes. I write about Brooklynites who are activists, athletes, and artists and entrepreneurs who are serving their community. And I just wanted to know how each of you, I feel like to some extent you've spoken about this, but how you've taken steps to create a supportive network of other female professionals around you, and sort of how you've cultivated a group of female professionals who have helped like sort of track each other through your career ups and downs over the course of your professional lives. And sort of like, how do you maintain that with all of the other things that you're responsible for in your lives? Because I know it's really challenging.
They're friends, I mean, they're friends. They're people I want to talk to. And they're not necessarily in the same fields, but the skill sets and the challenges and how you balance everything generally tends to be the same conversation, no matter whether you're in media or you're in finance or you're in hospitality or something completely different. But I think the most supportive people have become very close friends, and we've bonded at different times through work, and you just make the time because you want to stay in touch. I know that sounds really basic, but that's how it's worked for me.
And there's an understanding, right? Everybody, Anne's right. They're all my friends. They're not my business network.
Mhm.
They've become friends, right? We're celebrating limited celebration, but someone who I've been friends with and started out in this business together this weekend. And because it's a weekend, it's not a business day, it's a friend, it's exactly everything Anne says, and they understand. You cannot be in communication every day, and they're living that same life, right? Because they're in your business, they understand that. So there's an appreciation for how to manage and being a mom, being a working mother, being a wife, being whatever it may be. There's this understanding that these women in your network, in your business network, will get it, and lean into that. You are friends, and you understand that sometimes life takes over, and sometimes family takes over, and there's this swing that happens, and that's the balance. The balance is never this. It's one or the other. It's a seesaw, right? It's never going to be all there at all the time, and they get it, and they get it, and they get it. It's an honest friendship.
Yeah. I mean, I think to both Danielle and Anne's point, also, it's, you can't really separate your life from your work life. So the people who are going to support you are the kind of folks that understand that those two things coexist all the time, right? It's sort of like the way you can't separate yourself from being a woman and a human being, right? Like those two things coexist at the same time always. So you want to have those people. The other thing that I would say is just take a little bit of pressure off of how often you have to be in touch and what format that should take and what type of conversations you should be having. Just take a little bit of pressure off of yourself, and the group of folks that you want to support, and just concentrate on having connected relationships that are supportive, and they'll be supportive in every aspect of your life when you need them to be. And that's the best way to pick it. I mean, I should say I also have different groups. I'm sure it's the same for all the other women on this panel, different groups of people for different things, right? Which is also fine, I have a chat group about what shoes should I really wear to this gala thing that I'm going, and that's what that chat group is for. And I have another chat group that I was on with yesterday, which is what is my total compensation package need to look like for this job? This is what I'm thinking. What are you thinking, right? It's okay to also have different groups that lean in different ways and contribute, right? Because You're a whole person comprised of many different interests and ideas and needs, right? And those can't always just be fulfilled by one person or one set of folks, right?
Absolutely. I think that's great advice. And again, don't put too much pressure on what that needs to look like. I believe we are up to our last question. So I'd like to invite Alejandra.
I am a new filmmaker, and so I am having a little bit of trouble finding legal representation for everything, copyrights, contracts, and all the stuff but where to find people that you can actually trust. So what advice do you have?
I'm going to put the Center for Communications on the hook to help you figure out a good list of people that they could recommend for you to start your journey on, right? I mean, I think probably a good place to also start is Better Business Bureau. There's one for the city of New York. There might be a list there of people who are, sort of well rated that you could start. I mean, I think usually I've gotten a recommendation from somebody, and that's how I have found the folks that I work with on all of these things. But I feel like CCC would be really helpful here, probably to folks, and they could develop a list to circulate.
There's also, if you're in New York, there is a group.
I am in San Francisco, actually.
Oh, you're San Francisco.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, because I was going to say we have a freelancers hub that actually helps with all of that stuff here. But there are similar situated groups out there, I'm reasonably certain. So
thank you, everybody, for joining us this evening. And if there are any follow-up questions, we are all here to be helpful to you. So you can find us on LinkedIn, and you can start to really enjoy. We have so many other forums and conversations, so please check us out, please join us. And we are grateful to all of our panelists for joining us this evening. Thank you so much.